All right, welcome to your deep dive on Les Fleurs du Mal. You've been watching some YouTube videos on Baudelaire, so we're going to skip the usual intro and get right to it.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. So imagine you're a poet, right? In 1850s France, and you're trying to capture the beauty in everything, even the stuff that's, well, kind of disturbing. That's what Charles Baudelaire was going for with Les Fleurs du Mal, which translates to the flowers of evil. And let me tell you, it caused a major stir back then.
Definitely not your typical poetry collection.
Not at all. So today, we're going to explore why this thing was so scandalous that it actually landed Baudelaire in court. And we'll look at how the book evolved, over time. And maybe most importantly, the techniques Baudelaire used to make even the, let's say, unpleasant aspects of life seem beautiful.
All great questions to consider.
Okay, so first off, can we talk about the fact that this book took over 20 years to create? Baudelaire mentions it as early as 1845, but it wasn't published until 1857. What's the deal with that long process?
Well, I think it really shows how meticulous Baudelaire was. I mean, he wasn't just throwing poems together. He was carefully crafting, like a true work of art.
It's like he was sculpting it, almost.
Exactly. And the title itself, went through some pretty drastic transformations, too.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. It's fascinating.
First it was, get this, le bien.
Whoa. Okay, so, deliberately provocative.
Oh, absolutely. Then it shifted to le limbe.
Yeah.
Which, if you know your Catholicism, refers to like a purgatory state.
Interesting. And then finally he landed on Les Fleurs du Mal, the flowers of evil.
Yep, the flowers of evil.
I gotta say, that title alone is kind of eyebrow-raising, It's like he's purposely trying to get a rise out of people.
Yeah, he was definitely playing with those contrasts, right? The idea of beauty in unexpected places, challenging what people thought was acceptable.
And this challenge led to some serious trouble with the authorities, right?
Yeah.
What's the story with this obscenity trial?
So picture this, 1857, Baudelaire's in court, actually on trial for obscenity. 6 poems from Les Fleurs du Mal were deemed, get this, offensive to public morals and had to be removed from the book.
Wow. Just imagine your art being judged in a court of law like that. What a wild time that must have been.
It really was. And it makes you think how different things were back then. Can you imagine what those judges would say about, modern art or music today?
Oh, man, that's a whole other conversation.
But it shows how art can challenge those societal norms, really push boundaries.
And Les Fleurs du Mal, it's a boundary-pushing work for sure.
Let's
talk about the structure of the book itself. In those YouTube videos you watch, they talk about these different sections, right?
Yeah, Les Fleurs du Mal is super carefully divided into 6 sections. Each one explores a different theme. You have one on the tension between our ideals and, the realities of life, and another on the, beauty and horror of city life.
So understanding the structure is key to understanding the whole thing.
Absolutely. It's imagine having a map to Baudelaire's brain. You see how he's deliberately guiding the reader through these different emotional and thematic landscapes.
A roadmap to Baudelaire's mind. I like that.
It's a journey. And what's even more interesting is he added a whole new section, Tableau Parisien, to the 2nd edition of the book. Why would he do that?
That's a good question. It was published in 1861, right?
Yeah. And I think adding that section shows Baudelaire's growing fascination with the modern city. Paris was going through massive transformation at the time, industrialization, urbanization, all this social upheaval. And Baudelaire was captivated by it, both the beauty and the not so pretty parts.
So it's not just about the struggles inside us, but also the changing world around us.
Yeah, exactly. And that external world kind of seeps into his internal world too. He sees these parallels between the chaos of the city and the turmoil in his own soul.
That makes me think of this whole concept of double postulation that we've been talking about, that idea that everything has both positive and negative aspects. It seems to be play here, right?
Absolutely. Remember, double postulation is that idea that everything has a light and a shadow. And for Baudelaire, this wasn't some abstract philosophy thing. It was his lived reality. He saw it everywhere in the city, in people, even in his own relationship with spirituality.
Okay, so how does that double postulation show up in the poems themselves?
Well, one of the most striking examples is Un charogne, a carcass. It's this poem that describes a decomposing body in graphic detail. But within that, grotesqueness, Baudelaire finds a kind of beauty.
Wait, hold on. Beauty in a rotting corpse. I'm intrigued, but also kind of grossed out.
Yeah, I get it. It sounds paradoxical, right?
Okay.
But that's the brilliance of Baudelaire. He makes us confront the uncomfortable, see beauty where we least expect it.
So how does he actually do that? How does he make the grotesque seem, I don't know, compelling, even beautiful?
Well, one way is through his use of imagery. I mean, he just like bombards the reader with these vivid sensory details. You're right there in the scene, even if it makes you want to hold your nose. Lines like, "The flies buzzed upon that putrid belly, from which came black battalions of larvae." I mean, can you almost smell it?
Definitely not for the weak stomach. But yeah, I see what you mean. He's not shying away from the ugly. He's embracing it, almost magnifying it.
Exactly. But it's not just shock value, right? He also uses symbolism, like the decaying corpse in Une Charonne isn't just a literal thing. It's a symbol of mortality, of, the fleeting nature of beauty, and even this whole cycle of life and death.
And that symbolism forces you to, like, think beyond the surface. You have to engage with the poem on a deeper level.
Right, and it goes even further. Baudelaire's a master of sound devices, alliteration, assonance, rhythm. It's like he's composing symphonies with words, enhancing the emotional impact of the poems.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how he creates beauty out of the grotesque. It's not about ignoring the ugliness, but finding, I guess, a different kind of beauty within it.
That's a great way to put it. There's
Yeah.
one more technique I have to mention. Synesthesia. It's where he blends the senses together, like describing sounds as colors or smells as textures.
Yeah.
It creates this really unique experience for the reader.
It's like he's messing with your perceptions.
Yeah, exactly. So through all of this, the imagery, the symbolism, the sound devices, the synesthesia, he's creating beauty out of the grotesque. But was that his, true goal? Or was he just trying to be provocative? Was he actually trying to elevate the ugly or just thumb his nose at society?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer might lie in this whole idea of double postulation we keep coming back to.
Go on.
Well, Baudelaire understood that beauty and ugliness, like good and evil, aren't, mutually exclusive. He saw them as intertwined, existing together in the same object, the same person, the same experience. So maybe he wasn't trying to shock people, but rather, expand their understanding of beauty.
Exactly. He wanted to show that beauty can exist in these unexpected places, even in the darkest parts of human experience.
That's pretty profound when you think about it. So we know he's pushing boundaries, challenging conventions, but did he believe he was actually creating beauty? Or was it more about making a statement?
I think it was a bit of both, wouldn't you say?
That reminds me of a quote from one of those YouTube videos. Baudelaire said, "People will begin to understand Les Fleurs du Mal in a few years."
That's a really telling quote, right? He knew he was ahead of his time. He was confident that eventually people would catch up and recognize what he was doing.
He sounds like a true artist, Visionary, defiant, and maybe just a little bit misunderstood.
Oh, absolutely. He was all of those things. And his legacy reminds us that art has this power to, to provoke, to disturb, to enlighten, and ultimately to change how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
This has been amazing so far. We've explored the whole scandalous history of Les Fleurs du Mal, this meticulous structure that shows us Baudelaire's vision, and those techniques he used to make even the less appealing aspects of life captivating.
And this is just the beginning. We've got a lot more to dive into.
Exactly. Stay tuned, because next we'll be unpacking the deeper meaning behind Les Fleurs du Mal and its impact on the world of poetry. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but let's get to the heart of Les Fleurs du Mal. We've talked double postulation and how Baudelaire was obsessed with finding beauty in the ugly, but I feel like there's a whole other layer of meaning we haven't even touched yet.
You're right, there's so much more to explore.
So beyond the shock value, the artistic stuff, what's the deeper message here? What's Baudelaire trying to tell us?
Well, Baudelaire saw himself as this kind of spiritual traveler, always wrestling with good and evil, the sacred and the profane. And that internal battle, it's woven throughout the entire collection. It's not just about what's beautiful, it's about, grappling with what it means to be human.
So he's exploring the duality of human nature.
Exactly. That we're all capable of great love and terrible sin. We have these soaring aspirations, but we also experience crushing despair. It's that tension that makes us who we are.
And how does that duality play out in the structure of the book? We talked about the sections, but how do they all fit together? What's the bigger story he's telling?
Well, remember that first section, Spleen et les Dales? It introduces this tension between our ideals and the harsh reality of life. It's like he's setting the stage saying, this is the human condition, folks. We reach for greatness, but we're always pulled down by our own limitations and the suffering in the world.
So is it like a descent into darkness then? Does he offer any solutions, any way out?
He tries different things, right?
Yeah.
Love, art, intoxication, even the city itself. But in the end, true escape is elusive. That spleen, that feeling of overwhelming sadness and despair, it always creeps back in.
It makes me think of Le Goût du Néant, where he talks about this all-consuming emptiness. It's pretty bleak, but it's also, like, super relatable, especially if you've ever felt lost or disillusioned.
Exactly. Baudelaire taps into these universal feelings that go beyond a specific time or place. I mean, he's writing in the 19th century, but it still feels so relevant today, like that existential angst so many people experience in the modern world. It's all there.
Okay, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but I'm guessing there are moments of beauty in Les Fleurs du Mal too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Baudelaire was deeply affected by art, music, even those fleeting moments of beauty in everyday life. He saw them as these, like, glimmers of hope, escapes from the boredom and despair of life. Think about Elevation, the imagery and the rhythm. It's like he's trying to create this feeling of transcendence, a longing for something beyond our earthly limitations.
So even in the darkness, he's showing us glimpses of light. There's still hope.
That's the key. It's this constant push and pull between light and shadow, despair and hope. That's what gives Les Fleurs du Mal its depth and complexity. He doesn't give you easy answers. He embraces the contradictions.
Speaking of contradictions, I was really struck by his relationship with religion. He was raised Catholic, and there's religious imagery all over the place in his work. But it seems like his faith was, I don't know, a source of comfort and conflict for him.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's something scholars talk about a lot. I mean, he was clearly drawn to the spiritual, but he's also tormented by guilt, by the fear of damnation. It's like he couldn't fully embrace the comfort of religion, but he couldn't completely reject it either.
So he's torn between the appeal of spirituality and, let's say, his own less than holy desires.
Exactly. And this tension is really clear in his portrayal of Satan. For Baudelaire, Satan isn't just pure evil. He's also a symbol of rebellion, someone who challenges the hypocrisy of the world.
So he's finding something appealing in the figure of the devil. It's like he's attracted to the things that society tells us are wrong.
Absolutely. He's fascinated by transgression, pushing boundaries, exploring the darker side of human nature. And, this plays out in his own life too, right? His struggles with addiction, his unconventional lifestyle. He was definitely not one to follow the rules.
Yeah, he was a bit of a rebel.
He was. And that sense of being an outsider, it permeates his work. A perfect example is the albatross. You have this magnificent bird. It's a symbol of freedom, poetic inspiration. But when it's forced to land on the ship, the sailors, they just ridicule it, ostracize it.
Poor albatross. I guess it's safe to say Baudelaire felt a kind of kinship with this misunderstood creature.
Oh, for sure. He saw himself as that albatross, a misunderstood genius, rejected by a society that just didn't get him.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but one thing that still kind of throws me is his portrayal of women. Sometimes he seems to, like, idealize them, but then in other poems, they're dangerous, destructive. How do we make sense of that?
Ugh. Yes, the eternal feminine in Baudelaire's world. It's complicated, and it reflects his own complicated relationships with the women in his life.
Think about Jeanne Duval, his muse. In some poems, she's this goddess of beauty and sensuality. But in others, he's afraid of her, distrustful. It's almost like he worships female power, but also feels it.
You're spot on. It's important to remember the time period, There were so many changes happening, traditional gender roles being questioned. His work reflects those anxieties, as well as his own personal struggles.
So it's not just, like, simple misogyny. It's a reflection of the complexities of the time and his own experiences.
Exactly. We have to consider the historical context in his own life to fully understand how he portrays women.
Wow, this is getting deep. It's amazing how Les Fleurs du Mal opens up all these different paths to explore. But can we talk about his legacy for a minute? How did Les Fleurs du Mal influence other poets and artists?
Oh, Baudelaire's influence is huge. Not just poetry, but art, music, even philosophy. He's considered like a forerunner to the symbolist movement, which was all about using suggestion and imagery to evoke emotions and ideas.
So he paved the way for poets like Verlaine, Rimbaud, Mallarmé.
Exactly. They were all inspired by him, by his use of language, how he tackled these taboo subjects, how he found beauty in the unexpected. He showed them that poetry could be more than just traditional themes and forms, that it could explore the depths of the human psyche.
It's wild how his work had this ripple effect, influencing generations of artists. And it's even more amazing when you consider that he faced censorship, condemnation, all these personal struggles. It's like he never gave up on his art.
He was dedicated, that's for sure. His story reminds us that art can provoke, disturb, enlighten. And in the end, it can change how we see ourselves and the world around us.
This has been incredible. We've uncovered so much about Baudelaire, from his personal life to his groundbreaking poetry and his lasting impact. It's clear why Les Fleurs du Mal is still one of the most important and controversial works of literature out there.
And what I find most striking is how relevant his themes still are. We're still asking those same questions about good and evil, beauty and ugliness. That search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic.
He's speaking to that core human experience no matter what time period you're in.
He really is. It shows the power of art to connect us across generations.
I'm so glad we did this. But before we wrap up this part, I have to ask, what's the biggest takeaway for you from all this? What's the one thing you want our listener to remember about Les Fleurs du Mal?
That's a great question. I think the key takeaway is this. Baudelaire shows us that beauty can exist anywhere, even in darkness and decay. He challenges us to look deeper, to embrace the complexities of life, and to find poetry even in the midst of pain and suffering.
It's like he's saying, even when things are tough, there's still beauty to be found if you're willing to look for it.
Exactly. And that's a really powerful message, especially in today's world.
Well said. Now stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore what lessons we can learn from Les Fleurs du Mal and how its themes continue to resonate in the 21st century.
You know, it's amazing, right? As we've been talking about Les Fleurs du Mal, it's wild how Baudelaire's work from way back then, like the 1800s, still feels so relevant now.
Yeah, it really is incredible how much it resonates.
Like his whole exploration of urban life, the anxieties about like spirituality and faith, even his fascination with, the darker parts of human nature, it all feels so connected to what we're dealing with in the modern world.
Totally. It's like he had this, I don't know, this almost supernatural ability to tap into these human experiences that like transcend time. Right. He was writing during a time of huge social and technological change, kind of like what we're going through now, and he just gets it. That feeling of being caught between the old ways and the new, between, I don't know, belief and doubt.
Exactly. Baudelaire was living in this in-between space, a world that's transforming, He saw the old order crumbling, the new one emerging, and he wasn't afraid to, dive into the anxieties that came with that shift.
And that feeling of unease, that spleen that's all over his work, doesn't that just hit home for us today? I mean,
Right.
think about it. The constant information overload, the pressure to succeed, that feeling of being lost in the crowd, it's all there in Les Fleurs du Mal.
Oh, for sure. I remember Tableau Parisien, the section he added later. He portrays the city as both magnetic and kind of repulsive at the same time, a mix of beauty and decay, excitement and alienation. That whole feeling about city life is, I think, so relevant to us now.
Yeah, even his observations about consumerism feel almost prophetic. In Un Passant, he describes a woman with eyes illuminated like shop windows. It's almost like he could see how obsessed we'd become with stuff and, surface appearances.
He was definitely picking up on those changes. And what's interesting is he doesn't just condemn it all. He's drawn to it, even as he recognizes the potential downsides.
So he's not saying go back to the old ways. It's more like, let's understand the present with all its complications.
Exactly. He's asking us to really look at the complexity of modern life, the good and bad, the progress and the traps. He's not giving us the answers, but he's definitely making us ask the tough questions.
I mean, that's why his work stays with you, right?
Mhm.
It's not about solutions. It's about starting a conversation, getting us to think critically.
Yeah, he challenges us to look beyond the surface, to really delve into the human mind and find meaning even when everything feels chaotic and, kind of hopeless.
Okay, but how exactly are we supposed to find meaning in a world that often feels, well, meaningless? What does that look like for us as readers trying to figure out our own modern struggles?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is the idea of creative expression. For Baudelaire, art could be a way to redeem yourself, to turn pain into beauty. He showed us that even when things are rough, we can find some peace and meaning through writing, painting, music, any kind of art.
So he's not saying just ignore the darkness. He's saying use it, turn it into something creative, something beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. He's saying face it head on, acknowledge it,
Hmm.
and then find a way to go beyond it through art.
That's a pretty powerful message. So if we had to, like, sum all this up, give our listener one final thought to take away, what would it be? What's the essence of Baudelaire's legacy?
I think Baudelaire, even though he's known for being kind of dark and gloomy, he actually gives us this message of hope and, resilience. He shows us that even when we feel lost, even when the world seems like it's falling apart, we still have the power to create, to find meaning, to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
It's like he's saying, hang in there, embrace the struggles, find the beauty in the unexpected, and most importantly, don't ever stop creating.
I love that.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Les Fleurs du Mal and the world of Charles Baudelaire. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
We hope you've enjoyed it, and until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep finding beauty wherever you can.